You think you're brave? Spend the next hour with me if you dare. These aren't just stories. They're real-life nightmares. Tonight, they're coming for you. My gated community has one rule: no laughing after dark. 1 week ago, my wife and I moved into a gated community called Bravaro, one of those cutout paradises with an aesthetic so vivid in photos, yet anemic in reality. After living there for 2 days, we moved to a hotel. It'll be our home for the foreseeable future. We just need to sell the property and find a new one. Anything, anywhere, far from Bravaro. That's the only requirement. The nefarious nature of that place only became apparent once the street's rule had been broken. No laughing after dark. "Honey," I called, chuckling. "What?" my wife replied from the other room. "Get in here and see this," I said. Rowan strolled into the lobby with a beam on her face, still intoxicated by our new home. She rubbed a loving hand down my back, tracing the curvature of my spine. "What's got you smirking, Owen?" she asked. "This," I said, proudly displaying the leaflet that I'd found on the doormat. Rowan leaned forwards and read it alongside me. "Dear Owen and Rowan, this is Irene from the Bravaro HOA. Welcome to day 1 of your new life in this safe, vibrant community. You've already met Gordon, our resident security guard, so you'll know that safety is of the utmost importance to us, and the vibrancy of this community is apparent, but it extends beyond superb landscaping and house-proud homeowners. It is the people who make this street vibrant. Parties and events, such as our regular garden gatherings and film nights, make this truly a place to call home. However, I do think it prudent to inform you of one particular rule that, without exception, will be enforced. There must be no laughing after dark. This is not a matter of noise. We understand that all residents will want to watch TV, listen to music, or simply talk. Noise is an unavoidable part of life, but laughter between sunset and sunrise is strictly prohibited in Bravaro. What constitutes as after dark? There is no specific time at which laughter must cease. After all, the sun sets around 4 o'clock in winter and nearly 10 o'clock at the height of summer. Moreover, there is a window of murkiness between day and night. You might be wondering when to keep quiet. If you want my advice, Mr. and Mrs. Neville, I would suggest that you not risk laughing once the day's light starts to fade. Once the sun starts to creep close to the horizon. But this is not a rule enforced in a black and white manner. It is not even a rule enforced by the HOA itself. Aside from that, there really is nothing to bear in mind. I do not run an oppressive association. You've already read and signed the contract. You know how we operate. Grow your hedges as tall as you wish. Paint your front door a garish color. Walk the streets after midnight if you so wish. Just do not laugh after dark. I told you I didn't want to live with rich people. They're unhinged, my wife said. No laughing after dark? What sort of dystopian nonsense is that? I hate moving. There's always something that this estate agent fails to mention. Some catch with every too good to be true property. I sighed. Sure, there was the broken dishwasher in the first place, the busted taps in the second place, the oven that fell loose in the third place. Issues that the agents and homeowners should have mentioned, Rowan said. But I thought we were past all of that, Owen. I thought buying a house at such a sickening price meant that we'd be able to forego absurd problems. And this is worse than any of the issues in our old houses because we won't even be able to fix the problem. Of course we will. We shall become joyless husks, my dear wife, I sarcastically teased, maintaining a straight face as I embraced Rowan. For there is no laughter in Bravaro. This is a place of principles. Of sincerity, I say. Go forth, my wench, and prepare me a sandwich in the kitchen. My wife offered a blank face. Actually, there's no need to worry. No chance of laughing with you around. I could tell by the look on her lips that Rowan wanted to chortle. So did I. But, in spite of our sarcastic responses to the letter, my wife and I were still drawn to the setting sun beyond the window, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. It would be moronic not to follow the rule for the first night at least. I sensed that my wife felt just as uneasy as me, felt as if this were more than HOA authoritarianism. Given how lax they seemed on all other fronts, the one rule was unsettling. Why laughter? Why that sound above all others? The sound of joy itself. It was too late to do anything on the first evening. I decided I would discuss the letter with the HOA chief the following day. I rang as soon as I woke up. "Owen Neville, so wonderful to receive a call from you." Irene heartily laughed the next morning. "How was your first night in Bravero?" "It was good," I uncertainly replied. "Irene, I'm calling you about the welcome letter." "Ah, I see. Did everything make sense?" she asked warmly, yet obliviously. I frowned, before realizing the woman obviously hadn't seen my face on the other end of the phone. Well, it was relatively straightforward. There wasn't much to digest, but one thing befuddled the two of us, the rule about laughter. Irene did not pause, and her bubbly tone did not falter. "Yes, no laughing after dark, that's all." I did explain how to interpret after dark. There is no exact cutoff point, no moment at which day becomes night. Do you understand? I sighed. "It's not about that, Irene. It's about the nature of the rule itself. Does it not seem a little totalitarian to you? I'd understand a rule such as no noise after 11 in the evening. But a rule about not laughing after dark is so oddly specific, and it doesn't seem warranted. I don't see why laughing would ever be worse than other noises that neighbors could make." I paused, but Irene said nothing, so I continued. "Plus, as you mentioned in the letter, the sun sets early in winter. Are you seriously suggesting that on Christmas Day, to give an example, Rowan and I wouldn't be able to have a joyous time with our family after, say, 3 or 4 in the afternoon?" "Not at all, Mr. Neville. Be as joyous as you want throughout the year," Irene gasped. "I'm only saying that you wouldn't be able to laugh after dark, not until the sun rises once more." I grumbled in frustration. I have to say, I'm more than frustrated to be learning of this rule after finalizing the contract. "Did you not talk to the letting agent about Bravero's HOA before purchasing the property, Mr. Neville?" Irene asked. "Yes," I spat. "I signed your association's agreement, and there was no mention of this rule in there. I know because I read it again this morning. So, this isn't legally enforceable." "You're absolutely right, Mr. Neville. It isn't legally enforceable," Irene replied. I huffed anxiously. "Right. So, did I mention anything about a possible breach of our contract?" Irene interrupted. "Did I mention anything about the consequence of breaking the rule? Did I mention, for example, anything about seizing the property, should you not comply?" "Well, no," I said. "But what's the point of making a rule that you wouldn't be able to enforce?" "As I mentioned in the letter, Mr. Neville, I'm not the one who enforces it," Irene replied. "The HOA didn't make the rule. We simply inform." "I see," I muttered through clenched teeth, tiring of the irritatingly cheery busybody. "So what would be the consequence of my wife or I deciding to laugh after dark?" For the first time in our entire conversation, Irene fell silent, hesitated for a moment. Longer than a moment, in fact. It was her only sign of humanity throughout the call. The only sign that she was more than a pre-programmed series of chipper, dismissive statements. "This is an amazing neighborhood, Mr. Neville," Irene solemnly said. "The 50 residents of Bravero lead happy lives, and I hope you join them. I truly do. But we have all had to sacrifice something for such peace, such security from the outside world. And that something is laughter, Mr. Neville, but only during those dark hours of the day." "That's not an answer, Irene," I said. "What would be the consequence?" "I wish you'd known the few poor souls who received an answer," Irene replied coldly. "If you had, you wouldn't be asking questions. You'd not dare to laugh ever again." The curt woman, whose jolly demeanor had entirely dissipated, abruptly ended the call, and I was left sitting in my study for the rest of the day, ignoring messages from my boss and coworkers. Not only refusing to work, but refusing to move. That may seem a little extreme, but you'd understand my reaction if you'd overheard that call, if you'd lived on the street of Bravero for a mere 2 days, as my wife and I did, because we certainly didn't stay after what happened on the second night. I was stirred from my trance, which must have lasted hours, around 9 in the evening. Rowan had finally returned home from another late night at the hospital, and the slam of the front door seemed to finally bolt my frozen body from its paralysis. Still, the sudden return to reality didn't make me feel any better about the call with Irene. I didn't dismiss the rule as the overbearing control of a tyrannical association. No, I believed the old woman. I believed that something awful would happen if we were to laugh. I had no idea what that something might be, but I'm no fool. I wasn't going to wait for an answer. I didn't want an answer. I wanted my wife and I to sell our home. I wanted us to buy a hotel for a night and figure everything else out after that. Owen? Rowan called. I shakily stumbled out of the office, wondering what had possessed me, wondering why my heart was beating so quickly. Irene's just a power-hungry socialite, I told myself. You should hire a lawyer. Talk about this arbitrary rule, which wasn't included in the agreement. That was what the rational part of my brain said. However, the irrational part of my brain, the part steered by my sick gut, told me to ignore logic, ignore reason, and listen to that ever-present dread in my heart, the dread that told me to listen to Irene, the dread that told me to take my wife away from Bravero. By the time I reached the lobby, I was panting. Sweetie, My eyes widened when I saw that Rowan wasn't alone. Her colleague, Joanne, was standing beside her. My wife's friend wore a smile on her face. Sorry, it's been a wild day, Rowan sighed, walking over to me and planting a kiss on my cheek. I'm just going to lend Jo one of my dresses. She's got a fun night out planned for tomorrow. I'll be out of your hair in a jiffy, Owen, Joanne promised. I followed my wife upstairs and started whispering. Honey, I said, I talked to Irene. Something is very wrong with this place. What do you mean? My wife replied as we reached the upstairs landing. Did you tell her that the HOA didn't mention a noise rule in the agreement we signed? Yes, I said. She admitted that it isn't an official rule. Nothing that could be legally enforced. Good, Rowan smiled. Case closed, sweetheart. No, I shook my head. It isn't closed. She told me that the rule is enforced by... Well, she didn't say who enforces it. She just said some really disturbing things, Rowan. Said that others had learnt the consequence the hard way. She was giving me a warning. Or a threat. My wife frowned. Should we find an attorney? This isn't right. This bullying tactic. It must breach our contract or some law. We can fix all of that later, I said. Right now, I want to get out of here. What? Rowan asked. Sweetie, we just moved into this place. And I'm telling you to trust me, sweetie, I begged, still breathing heavily. Do you? Well, of course, Owen, but you're starting to make me anxious. My wife shivered. What did Irene say to you? It was her voice, Rowan. The way she mentioned the consequence. It wasn't right. Any of it. I think we should get out of here, I pleaded. I expected my wife to resist. Expected her to roll her eyes and say that life doesn't work that way. We just bought the house. To sell it immediately, based on an unnerving phone call, might seem a little extreme to some people. And if there were any other reason for my distrust, then I would absolutely agree. I'd argue that we should stand our ground, hire that attorney, laugh for hours in the comfort of our own home, simply despite the maniacs in charge. But I believed that woman, and Rowan clearly believed me. Okay, my wife nodded. I'll fetch that dress for Joanne, then we'll go to the hotel. But tomorrow, we have to sort everything. I smiled tearfully. Thank you, honey. What are you two doing up there? Didn't stumble into bed on your way to the wardrobe, did you? Joanne laughed loudly from downstairs. Ouch, my wife yelped. My fingers had involuntarily tightened like talons around Rowan's upper arms, but I immediately released her when I regained control. And then my eyes shot to the bedroom window, eyeing the darkness which painted the horizon. A sliver of sunlight persisted on that humid summer's evening, a glow at the end of a blackened tunnel. I prayed for the first time in my atheistic life. Prayed that she had laughed before dark. "Owen," Rowan whispered, lip trembling. "Would you call it dark outside?" I croaked. My wife's head rolled slowly to the window. Then she returned her frightful eyes to me. "It'll be fine, honey. I'm sure it'll be fine. Joanne didn't know about the rule. We'll receive a slap on the wrist or something. Like you told me this morning, there was nothing about laughter in the contract." By the haunted look in Rowan's eyes, it was clear that she, like me, felt something. A foreboding ripple in the air, which felt and smelt like rotten breath. I felt it a day earlier, when we unloaded our belongings from the moving van. The sense that something hid within Bravero. A watcher. "Hello," Joanne called again, chuckling. "Won't you stop?" I mumbled, clutching clumps of my hair. "Come on," Rowan whimpered, clumsily plucking a blue gingham dress from the rack. She'll take this, leave, and then we'll leave too. Okay?" I nodded, stepping in front of my wife and taking the dress from her. Then we walked across the landing, like weary prisoners on death row. I tentatively peered over the banister at Joanne, the smiling woman, donning turquoise scrubs that matched those of my wife. I was frustrated and terrified in equal measure by the innocence of Rowan's friend, the ignorance. The problem wasn't simply that Jo hadn't read the letter, it was that she clearly didn't feel what Rowan and I felt. Though my wife and I had been jubilant on that first day in our new home, our property had been pre-furnished with a weighty blanket of darkness, something I'd read in Rowan's eyes, and I'm sure she must have read it in mine. "You took your time," Joanne giggled, piercing my heart with fright for the third time. It made me laugh, seeing you run upstairs after her. "Did Rowan need your fashion tips, Owen?" "Something like that," I whispered, hurriedly handing the dress to my wife's friend. "Are you okay back there, Rowan?" Joanne smiled, peering at my wife, who timidly stepped out from behind me. "Come over shy all of a sudden. Now I'm starting to think you coy lovers really did get up to something. Ah, to be young again. Anyway, thank you very much, sweetheart. You're an absolute lifesaver. In this dress, I'm sure to catch the eye of..." Joanne was interrupted, not by knocking on the door, not by the disappearance of lights in the house, not by any ominous sign I expected. She was interrupted by spontaneous choking, prompted by nothing that made sense. "Joanne?" Rowan gasped, rushing forwards. My wife managed to catch her frightened friend in outstretched arms. Tears swam in Joanne's eyes as her legs buckled and she gasped for air. Then Rowan started to perform the Heimlich maneuver as snot spilled from Joanne's nostrils, and I contended with the terror of witnessing somebody die. Several excruciating seconds later, with the slight crunch of Joanne's ribcage splintering, a vile stream of bile released from the back of her throat, and in the mess, which spread in a festering pool on the floor, there floated a crumpled piece of paper. Being the only non-squeamish member of the trio, and noting that the other two were still recovering from the trauma of Joanne's sudden fit, I knelt down to pluck the note from the lake of vomit. It bore neat printed lines of text in a minute font. After I scraped a streak of sick away, 2 sentences became legible. "Expulsion notice. Please exit through the basement." I read the note aloud, whilst Joanne continued to splutter and my wife eyed me with confusion. So I read the note again and again. Joanne looked twice as perplexed as Rowan. I understood, of course. Understood that none of it seemed rational. We did not have an explanation for the note's mysterious arrival. Joanne hadn't swallowed the slip of paper. It had simply emerged at the top of her throat, corking her trachea. Not in an attempt to end her, clearly, given the note's second sentence. "Please exit through the basement," Joanne screamed as she flung the front door open. It revealed not the front porch, but the kitchen, and the back door of the house opened onto the front entryway. Windows opened onto the interiors of various other rooms throughout the house. This was the case not only for Joanne, but for Rowan and me too. We were all doomed to the same fate, trapped in a looping maze, and the horror of our predicament was unavoidable. We had one option. What happens if we listen to it? If we exit through the basement? My wife whispered. What is happening? Joanne wailed, barely registering anything. I shakily answered. You laughed, Joanne. I don't know why, but it's wrong. What are you saying? The woman shrieked tearfully, snot still staining her face. How did that appear in my throat? We don't understand it either, Rowan whispered, holding her friend's hand whilst turning to me. But we have to try the basement. It's the only room we've avoided. I gulped, nodding, and Joanne sobbed whilst I led the two of them to the door. It opened with a slight creak, and I should have breathed a sigh of relief at seeing the basement's darkened staircase rather than a portal to another room in the house. But there was no wave of euphoria, only that blackened tide of fear rolling towards my mind, threatening something worse than an end. I was haunted by the idea that death might be a kinder fate than whatever lay below. I guided us into the darkness, taking fragile steps and spinning my head frequently to ensure that Rowan and Joanne remained behind me. Once we reached the lightless basement floor, the door at the top of the stairs loudly closed, and I fumbled for the light switch, but it was gone. There seemed to be nothing down there. None of our unpacked boxes, no shelving units, nothing. Just an empty, unlit room, a black expanse. What now? Joanne timidly asked. I have no idea, I replied. We should look for an exit, Rowan said. This is the exit, I pointed out. That's what the note said. No, Joanne said. My wife agreed. Joe's right. There must be more to it than that. No, Joanne repeated, interrupting her more forcefully. Joe, are you okay? Rowan asked, shuffling around and grabbing my arm. Is that you? No, it's me, I said, taking my wife's hand. I thought you were holding on to Joanne. No, Joe, where are you? She queried fearfully. No, Joanne sobbed, her voice and presence seeming to grow more distant. And then came laughter, not a kind laugh, not a laugh of joy, not even a mocking one. It was a laugh devoid of soul, devoid of life, one that seemed to serve simply as the welcome to some eternal nightmare, one that Joanne seemed to be blindly walking towards, willfully or not. I clutched at air or a void with my free hand, desperate to find her, but she was gone. Stop it, Joe cried, sounding far too distant for such a compact basement. Why are you laughing? Show yourself. Who's there? Where are... Oh God, no. What are you? What are you? My wife's friend screamed as she saw something in the dark. Something that Rowan and I did not see. Something I know was too terrible for living eyes. As Joanne had perished, I'm not sure how I knew that. I simply understood that she would not return to the land of the living. I understood that she was not simply exiting Bravro. She was exiting reality, and she would not be entering some joyous afterlife. I had no doubt that a hellish, torturous eternity awaited. Squeaking wood sounded, and I rotated my head. Rowan and I had only walked a few steps from the staircase, but it was inexplicably 100 yards behind us. The open door at the top of the stairs cast light from the lobby. It was the only visible thing in the void which had swallowed Joanne. The void that still threatened to swallow Joanne and me. Come on, I yelled, dragging my wife behind me. As we darted towards the escape, I started to feel something more physical in the absence of the room, a manifestation of the dark tide that had been approaching on my mind. Joanne whimpered incoherently from a place both near and distant. It's Owen, Rowan cried as we reached the stairs. We have to go, I ordered, pushing my wife onto the first step. Please, Owen, she begged. There must be something, some way to save her. I turned for a moment and immediately felt a searing pain in my brain. That black tide had finally arrived, washing away all the joy in my soul, bringing not suffering, but the promise of suffering. It was a warning from whatever lay in the deepness of that basement, whatever thing outside of the HOA enforced the rule. Rowan and I had obeyed that rule. Joanne had not. My wife and I were being offered safe passage from the terror. We were on the stairs, mere yards away from safety. But I considered it for a moment, considered what my wife had said. There had to be a way of saving Joanne, in place that defied all spatial laws. I still felt the presence of Rowan's friend, felt her cries burrowing deeply into my ears, as distant as they sounded. I realized that the place was a trick. She might only be yards from us. I could do something. But the Watcher read my thoughts, read my intent to plunge into the darkness and rescue the poor woman. That likely would have broken some other unspoken rule, for a hand stretched from the black. And it did not belong to Joanne. It was a skeletal, six-fingered appendage, cloaked in ragged, ripped strips of gray skin. It was not skin at all, of course, just as the hand was not a hand. It was not anything that belonged to anyone. Worst of all, I know it did not even belong to the Watcher. The hand was a tool used to make its point. If I had seen even a sliver of that thing's true form, I would have been broken like Joanne. Whatever enforced the rule of joyless evenings in Bravro, it did not come from anywhere earthly, and it did not take Joanne anywhere earthly. I screamed, backing away from the fingers as they sought to snatch me. Perhaps, by returning to the dark and searching for Joanne, I would have faced the same horrible doom, but I didn't allow myself to find out. I narrowly swerved the fingers and followed Rowan clumsily up the stairs before slamming the door behind us. The two of us ran to the front entrance, and Rowan pushed down the handle to reveal a wonderful sight. Our porch, our driveway, more importantly. We did not stop to pack, did not stop to think. We bundled into the car, drove away from Bravro, and promised never to look back. A few days have passed, and we've decided not to return to collect our things. Even at the sun's high point of the day, I wouldn't risk uttering even the slightest giggle in Bravro. Besides, there are things worse than material loss, things worse than death even, but I never gazed at those things, and I pray I never will. I pray for something truly awful, in truth. I wish that Joanne had died before seeing whatever she saw. Someone tried to save me 158 times. When tragedy strikes, it unfolds in the most unexpected ways. There are no ominous narrations or suspenseful melodies, no hints that the ordinary will suddenly transform into an extraordinary event. In an instant, a cataclysm can reveal its devastating maw, leaving chaos and despair for those left to witness. The air was chilly in November, and amidst the anticipation of a 4-day Thanksgiving weekend, the impending doom of finals loomed, clouding our excitement. That morning, I was in my science class, doing my best on the final exam. Too quickly, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The events that followed were both awe-inspiring and terror-inducing. As I recall, we were finalizing the evidence for our report when my ears popped as if I had rolled down the window of a speeding car. A jarring rumble shook the classroom, accompanied by a deafening blast that robbed me of breath. The fire alarm wailed as water rained down, drenching us. I sprang up from my desk with an odd adrenal focus. We hastily made our way toward the aisle, abandoning our finals. Surprisingly, we maintained a semblance of order. The fire alarm blared as our teacher guided us out, and we obeyed in a mix of fear and trust. Like frightened animals, we followed the teacher's lead, navigating the corridors to the nearest exit. We had to walk past my mom's classroom, and I wondered if I'd see her getting her kids out. As I turned the corner, her classroom came into full view, and what I beheld was a nightmare made manifest. My heart seemed to stop, yet its frantic pounding was louder than ever. My mother's classroom door, torn off its hinges, lay in a shattered heap against the opposite wall. The threshold was consumed by a furious inferno, raging uncontrollably. I was now the one to stand witness to this wake. I don't know what compelled me to charge into that blazing maw. Was it a delusion of invincibility, a desperate belief that I could save her like a superhero? Or was it a simple act of need, driven by an unexplainable force? I cannot say even now. I pushed through the flames and smoke, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, the fire ceased its anger. Descending the staircase with the grace of a stumbling infant, I hardly registered the loss of footing halfway down. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, dulling the pain as I tumbled, and I regained my balance on the final steps. And there, at the bottom step, an impossible coldness enveloped me. The chill of the air permeated my senses as I departed the bottom step. Inside the room, obscured by dense smoke, the cries of anguish echoed. A nervous sweat broke out on my brow as I ventured forward, guided by the sound. The acrid stench of burning flesh and hair assaulted my senses, threatening to overpower me. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, granting me the unwelcome gift of sight. I wish they had failed me. The horrifying images etched deeply into my psyche, charred bodies strewn across the floor, their limbs twisted and contorted. Some still smoldered, becoming consumed by thin lines of crimson that crawled greedily along their blackening skin, reducing it to ash. The scene was catastrophic. It was repulsive. A nauseating sensation crept up from within, that familiar prelude to vomiting. I fought to suppress it, driven by an instinct to reach the crying emanating from an overturned desk in the far corner of the room. That must be my mom. She's still alive, I thought naively. My path was obstructed by the lifeless forms of classmates. Deep down, my gut warned me to leave, but I ignored it. Almost reaching the desk, my attention was drawn to yet another body lying in my path. This one was slightly larger than the others. It took only a moment to realize the unthinkable. This was my mother. Her right side was gruesomely absent, her eyes clouded with milky white, and her jaw hung slack. She had lost an arm and a leg. Dead. My mother lay lifeless at my feet. The sound of sobbing erupted again, originating from behind the desk. No discernible words, just heartbroken sobs. Setting aside my grief for the moment, aided by shock, I left my mother's side to reach this person. The true magnitude of the disaster had not yet fully sunk in, the realization that no one could have survived. The crying grew louder as I approached, echoing not only in my ears, but in my thoughts. It drowned out the clamor of the alarms. It was as if I was ensnared in a waking dream, where the cries became my sole focus, blotting out every other sense. Reaching the desk, I cautiously peered behind it, my eyes drawn to a huddled figure in the corner. His blackened skin mirrored the others, and he possessed little remaining hair. Tremors coursed through his body as he faced the wall, his arms extended limply, wrists hanging from his forearms. "Hey," I yelled. "Are you okay? Can you move?" I said as I maneuvered around the desk. Looking back on it now, it was incredibly obvious that he wasn't okay. No response. Perhaps the explosion had damaged his hearing. Instinctively, I reached out and grasped his hand. The moment our skin made contact, the crying ceased and the tremors subsided. Slowly, he began to turn his head towards me, his neck moving with jerky, disjointed snaps, and then I beheld his face. Leathery skin clung to his emaciated skull, while his wide eyes, milky gray and white, mirrored my mother's. Through a slackened jaw, brown teeth peeked out, devoid of lips. His broken nose sat withered upon his face. Completely naked, his leathery skin continued down his skeletal frame, with patches peeling off, revealing a putrid yellow fluid oozing from the infected wounds. I stood there in shock, taking in his convulsions and heaves. Suddenly, his head rocked like that of a newborn, and he took a ragged, strained breath. Then, he let out a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. But that's not the right way to describe it. The sound triggered a sensation within me, a feeling that wasn't entirely my own. I was engulfed by an overwhelming grief, an intense pain that consumed me entirely. Guilt, as I had never known, washed over me, threatening to drown me in its depths. I recoiled from the desk, stumbling backwards until I fell onto my mother's charred remains. A cloud of ash billowed forth, caressing my face as I gasped for air. I inadvertently inhaled the plume of my mother's ash. I vomited on myself, tears streaming uncontrollably. Crawling on my hands and knees, I distanced myself from the nightmare. my existence teetering on the brink. I crawled and then ran once I regained my footing. I ran out of that room, up the stairs, through the engulfing flames, through the school, past my bewildered classmates. I kept running. I ran until my legs could no longer bear the weight of my body and my shattering reality. Just keep running. Eventually, I collapsed in a local park where the police discovered me. The cold, crisp grass cradled my face, leaving damp imprints in unison with my tears. The officer who found me sat silently beside me in the field, offering no words of advice nor encouragement. We both began to shiver as the cold crept into our bones. I laid in that field till I succumbed to exhaustion and fell into a fitful sleep. I was so utterly exhausted when the officer drove me home. I awoke to a reality that felt both distant and surreal. The following year slipped away in a haze, an amalgamation of twisting memories and blurred moments. I found myself residing in my mother's home, under the temporary custody of my aunt and uncle. The settlement from the life insurance payout, locked away in a conservatorship, offered a glimmer of financial security. Grateful for their decision, I thanked my lucky stars that my aunt did not seize the opportunity to claim the money as her own. Instead, she handed me a substantial sum of cash. It was an overwhelming amount for a 17-year-old to possess while grappling with the weight of newfound responsibility. In due course, I was granted emancipation, propelled forward by financial freedom. Little did I know that this freedom would become a catalyst for a destructive spiral, deepening the void within my soul with every regretful choice. The passing months merged, as if time itself was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. I was constantly oscillating between moments of heroin-induced intoxication and near unconsciousness. My days were spent in a perpetual state of chasing a fragile equilibrium. And so, as predictable and anticlimactic as it may sound, I succumbed to the overwhelming grip of a heroin overdose. I vaguely recall the nature documentary playing in the background as I craved another hit. Preparing the syringe, I found a suitable vein, and the liquid bliss coursed through my veins, flooding my senses. Was it my fifth hit? Sixth, more than I had ever done before. The rush surged through my body with an intensity I couldn't bear. My balance faltered, and I collapsed onto the couch, my head spinning in a disorienting haze. I slipped into unconsciousness, unaware of the vomit that spilled forth from my mouth. At that moment, I believe I was on the brink of death. In my haziness, I faintly recall the piercing scream someone entered the front door. I must have appeared as a visual embodiment of the death I had longed for. It was my aunt who discovered me in that state, a sight she never deserved to see. She was far too good to be exposed to the wretchedness that had become me. Rehabilitation became an inevitable path I had to tread. My therapist posited that the horrors I witnessed in my mother's classroom were projections of my mind, personifications of the hellish experiences I endured. In the ensuing months, I grappled with a profound sense of worthlessness, despite the earnest efforts of those around me. Weeks continued to bleed into months, and progress toward emotional and mental recovery became a slow, agonizing burn. No matter the tools and coping mechanisms I acquired, no matter the mental acrobatics I performed, I found myself sinking deeper into the abyss. The insidious cravings for substances clung to my heart with sickening tenacity. By the end of that year, I retreated into seclusion, abandoning my education and embracing a life of isolation. Depression became my constant companion, blurring the days into an indistinguishable haze. I traded one vice for countless others, escaping reality that operates through endless hours of pornography and video games, despising every fiber of my existence late into the solitary nights. Even in sleep, I found no respite. My nights were tormented by relentless nightmares, unyielding in their pursuit of stealing away what little rest I had left. At my emotional nadir, I ceased to care for even my most basic needs. My body, an instrument of survival, was now perpetually hunched, bent by the weight of my deteriorating state. I had become a repugnant wreck, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within my mind. I was a mirror reflecting the distorted image of my shattered mentality. The battle against my demons was slipping through my fingers, and I was losing myself in the process. In time, my life embarked on a transformative journey, emerging from the shattered remnants of an existence that had unwittingly become my solace. It began with a simple spark, an eruption of laughter. It was not a mere chuckle or a fleeting smirk. It was a belly-deep laugh that reverberated within me. The sound itself was foreign to my ears, stirring confusion and exhilaration. At that moment, I felt immense pride swell within me. Soon after, I shed my former self, transitioning from a reanimated corpse to an animated being. My new addiction became growth, and I pursued it with fervor. I constructed a fortress, a barricade to withstand the relentless onslaught of my mind. I tamed the internal chaos that had consumed me, gradually reclaiming control over my destiny. With every strained step, I crawled a feeble yet indomitable way up that treacherous mountain. Knowing I had to venture beyond my childhood home to nurture my emotional development, I decided without hesitation. I relinquished my home to my aunt, packed my belongings, and embarked on a journey to Florida. Florida became my homestead. I found refuge in a vacation cabin amidst the serenity of the Everglades. There were no neighbors for miles around, and the land belonged to a kind couple whom were seldom present. The cabin, nestled within a dense, humid forest, provided ample opportunity to confront my innermost thoughts, aiding my recovery. Though reclusive, I reveled in newfound freedom. The forest around me was a testament to nature's magnificence. It thrived with beauty, teeming with life and vibrant hues. Birds sang, insects hummed, and the sun set gracefully. It was a stark contrast to the desolate nights I had once known. Occasionally, I would venture to an ocean-fed creek a stone's throw away, indulging in peaceful fishing. With each passing day, I slowly fortified my resolve, gathering the shattered pieces of my courage. The journey ahead remained daunting, but still, a glimmer of hope illuminated the path ahead. I clung to the belief that someday, somehow, I would break free from the clutches of this fear. It was precisely what I had yearned for. My life had become my own again. Though the memories of that night still carried pain, they had become more bearable. I was on the verge of uttering those elusive words, "I am happy," until the nightly lamentations found me, the anguished cries piercing the silence, a relentless reminder of the entity that haunted me. Sleep became an elusive luxury, for as darkness descended, the wails shattered any chance of rest. Daylight offered a brief respite. The cries became a force that unleashed forgotten pain, shattering the barricade I had erected. The dormant rancor within me stirred, awakening with a vengeance. My inner turmoil returned, engulfing me in a tempest that left me gasping for breath. My resilience crumbled like sand slipping through trembling fingers. The laughter that once danced upon my lips died in my throat. I broke quickly, so quietly. Then one night, I stirred from a nap that had inadvertently consumed me. A strange sensation tugged at my consciousness, rousing me from my slumber. The room was shrouded in stale silence, the clock displaying 1:26 a.m. It was the dead of night, yet mercifully devoid of the haunting cries. With cautious curiosity, I rose from my seat and made my way toward the front door, spurred by newfound audacity. I recall thinking I should step outside, prove to myself that nothing is there, prove the crying is simply in my head. As I approached the door, I envisioned walking outside and wondered where I should go. That night, the air was eerily calm, devoid of the usual bug song. I pressed my face against the small window on the door, peering into the darkness beyond, fully expecting to find only an indistinct shadow. But to my horror, there it stood, staring back at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Our faces were separated by a mere fraction of an inch of glass, locked in a macabre face-to-face encounter. A cacophony of screams erupted, shattering the once tranquil air and sending tremors through my home. The glow from the kitchen illuminated his face, etching its haunting contours deep within my mind. His quivering jaw moved erratically, a grotesque dance of opening and closing with each labored breath. Each exhale birthed a clinging mist, smearing the glass with intricate patterns, transforming its surface into eerie artistry. His vacant eyes remained fixed ahead, devoid of recognition, as if ensnared within the clutches of unyielding madness. With unsteady steps, he gradually retreated, his form shrinking into a crouched position mere feet away from my door. There was no denying the presence before me. Frozen in shock, I stood there, grappling with a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, curiosity, and twisted fascination intertwined, forming a turbulent whirlwind of conflicting impulses. Though an unsettling truth settled within me, there was no denying the raw reality of his existence. This was no figment of my imagination. It was a chilling encounter with a realm beyond comprehension. My scream tore through the air, an instinctual response fueled by primal emotions. No coherent words could encapsulate the overwhelming turmoil within me. Anger, fear, and frustration merged into a sickening sensation that gnawed at my core. I had grown tired of sleepless nights and a life that no longer felt like mine. I had escaped across the country to flee from this, yet here it was, huddled just feet away, mocking my desperate attempt at solace. It felt like a cruel joke my own mind was playing on me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking as tears streamed down my face. "Please, just leave me alone." My cries resembled the agonized wails of a wounded and trapped animal, raw and untamed. Outside, the creature continued its relentless screams, rising to its feet again with a disjointed movement. It approached my door, its contorted posture resembling the grotesque position of a late-stage tetanus patient, skin tearing as it leaped. "Leave me alone," I yelled again, unleashing a surge of pent-up emotion that had been dormant for far too long. But my plea fell upon rotting ears that could not comprehend or sympathize. It reached my door. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind. Over and over, I had imagined how I would confront and eradicate this embodiment of my deteriorating sanity. I had chosen this entity as the symbol of my mental decline, the effigy upon which my deserved future lay flayed in a blood eagle-like fashion, offered to the altar of my current reality. Driven by panic and rage, I grabbed the fire axe above my table, my body moving mechanically as I propelled myself back toward the barrier that separated us. A wordless scream of terror, revulsion, and hatred erupted from deep within me as I crashed through the door, my clenched teeth unable to contain the overwhelming intensity of my emotions. The creature was struck by the door, its body forcefully pushed backward, eliciting a feral gasp from its throat. Now, I was determined to end it. "Kill it. Kill me. Candle. Kill." The words reverberated in an unsettling loop within my mind, out of sync with each other, fueling my purpose as I prepared to face the culmination of my anguish. In a whirlwind of uncontrolled movement, I tumbled down the steps, my body flailing as I crashed onto the ground. Before I could fully process the fall, I found myself on my feet, instinctively rising without conscious thought. And there it was, face to face with me, its breath uncomfortably warm and sticky against my skin. The putrid stench of decay invaded my nostrils, causing me to recoil in demoralized repulsion. I felt my courage waver and my resolve crumble. I realized I was not strong enough, not capable of facing this. I backpedaled until I was pressed against the wall of my house. Then it screamed, convulsed, and trembled before me, its milky eyes fixed on an unseen horizon, its hands stretched out, reaching for something beyond my comprehension. With that scream, a surge of courage and rage flooded my being. It was the same as it had been all those years ago in the school, an overwhelming flood of emotions that were not truly mine to feel. It's difficult to articulate, but I embodied those emotions and allowed them to engulf me, to consume me. Kill. The word reverberated relentlessly in my mind. Springing forward with a wild scream, I swung the axe with all my might, the blade sinking deep into its side. The sensation of bone deflecting the force of my strike is etched into my memory, never to be forgotten. Blood and other fluids sprayed from the wound as it took a few faltering steps to the side, pushed by the momentum of my assault. The creature ceased its cries, its tremors, its breath. Time stood still, and it finally turned to look at me. Fear held me captive under its gaze. We stared at each other, locked in a moment that felt like an eternity. Foul breath washed over me once more, seeping into my senses. Beyond that, nothing happened. We simply stood there, locked in a silent exchange. I willed my frozen bones to thaw, my mind transitioning from terror and frenzied rage to something else. It wasn't pride, but rather a different, indescribable emotion, yet it carried a sense of triumph, I believe. Unbeknownst to me, it had reached out and gently grasped my arm, its touch going unnoticed until it began to speak. "I never meant to scare you," he rasped, his voice torn and ragged, struggling to emerge between shallow breaths. "I'm sorry. This has to happen to you," it uttered, its words filled with agony and desperation. Tears welled up in its eyes, a flicker of pain crossing its face as its ragged hand clutched at the axe lodged in its new laceration. "Please, kill me," he wheezed, his plea reverberating in my mind and reaching my ears simultaneously. With its other hand, it gripped the axe and brought the blade to its neck. "Kill me. Candle. Kill. Now." The final word echoed like an explosion within my head as its hand pressed against my face. Everything plunged into total darkness for a fragmented moment as I swung the axe. Suddenly, I felt myself hurtling through space, a void engulfing me. The air grew cold, and the wind whipped past, intensifying the disorienting descent. I screamed in a frenzy of confusion and terror, my voice lost in the abyss. Downward, I plummeted, faster and faster, the nauseating sensation overwhelming me. Did I die? Is this death? I'm dead. Thoughts of my imminent demise gripped my courage, but I resisted, unwilling to accept my fate just yet. In the distance, far below, a growing light pierced through the darkness. Fresh tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision and making it difficult to gauge the proximity of the light and how much time remained before I would be halted by the unforgiving ground. But it was rapidly approaching. I squeezed my eyes shut, unleashing a scream that echoed through the void. In the face of imminent death, I summoned every ounce of defiance within me. "I want to live." The words echoed in my mind, a fervent plea, repeating like a mantra. I curled into a protective ball, bracing myself for the impending impact that would mark my brutal end. Seconds stretched into eternity as I awaited the inevitable. Then, with a soft and gentle thud, I collided with the ground, the impact akin to falling off a couch. A feeble whimper escaped me, carrying away the remnants of my shattered pride. Slowly, I uncoiled my limbs and remained still, a mix of confusion and exhaustion paralyzing me. Was this death, or had I somehow managed to survive? At the very least, I was conscious. I reached out with my hands, feeling the texture of the hardwood floor beneath me. I attempted to open my eyes, but darkness engulfed everything, rendering me blind to my surroundings. Rolling onto my back, I extended my arms as far as they would go, searching for walls that eluded my touch, instead only finding a formless nothingness. A new fear emerged as a creeping suspicion arose. Did I even have a face? With trepidation, I brought my unseen hands towards my face, and a sharp sting shocked me as my dirty, sweaty fingers met my open eyes. It burned, and a faint chuckle escaped my lips, mingling with tears that continued to cascade down my face. I released a weak, triumphant sigh, throwing my arm in the air, and darkness claimed me once more, my consciousness slipping away. When I awoke, I found myself in an unfamiliar hallway, illuminated by ethereal torchlight. Glancing around from my position on the floor, I took in the details of my surroundings. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, its warped and aged dark wood floors covered in a thick layer of dust. On each side of me, 2 doors stood, adorned with handles clad in aged bronze. The peeling, curling white paint of doors cast small shadows that danced in the flickering flames. Ornate red and gold walls framed the hall, extending into the distance without interruption. The air hung still, thin, cold. I pushed myself upright, drawing a reflexive breath just to find that my lungs refused to cooperate. I couldn't draw in the air, an unsettling revelation that further shook my fragile state. Yet, amidst the disquietude, an unexpected acceptance settled upon me. Maybe I truly am dead, I mused, while massaging the space between my eyes. And perhaps this is limbo, or some other place beyond the realm of the living. Standing before the doors, I brushed off the accumulated dust as my fingers traced the bronzed knobs. I attempted to turn the knob of the door on my right. It remained resolute, refusing to budge with my attempt. I turned my attention to the door on my left, hoping for a different outcome. Yet, once again, my efforts proved fruitless. The doors remained firmly shut, denying me entry. A sense of resignation settled over me as I contemplated the possibility that I had indeed entered a land of limbo or purgatory where the deceased wandered aimlessly, seeking answers and respite. If there were lessons to be learned or tasks to be fulfilled, I had yet to discover them. But the absence of purpose, the prospect of eternal nothingness, weighed heavily on my soul. With a deep breath, I made the conscious decision to venture further into the darkness, forsaking the dwindling light behind me. Hours turned into an indeterminate passage of time as I traversed the corridor, my hand trailing along beside me against the cold surface of the wall. Surprisingly, fatigue and hunger eluded me, further reinforcing the notion that I probably died. If this was the extent of my existence, an eternal cycle of aimless wandering, I yearned for something more. The prospect of mere nothingness, devoid of purpose or meaning, felt like a reality abandoned by the gods long ago. Determination and desperation mingled within me, urging me to maintain my pace and to keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. And then, a sudden burst of light ruptured the darkness behind me, catching me off guard. The icy tendrils of fear gripped my chest, causing me to flail and stumble, my yelp swallowed by the darkness. With a surprising display of grace, I flopped heavily on my stomach. I clambered to my feet and swiftly turned around. Propelled by a sense of desperate longing, I hurtled toward the newfound light, driven by an unspoken fear that it would fade if I didn't reach it in time. Desperation fueled my actions as I lunged for the handle of the nearest door, seeking the anchor to halt my momentum. The handle remained steadfast, unyielding, as it abruptly halted my chaotic trajectory. I clutched the doorknob with both hands, pouring every ounce of strength to my attempt to pry it open. I threw my weight against the door, pulled, hit, kicked, and pleaded, but the door remained unafflicted. Exhausted and defeated, I crumpled against the door, collapsing to my knees. I buried my face in my folded arms. The tears flowed freely once again as a sense of hopelessness enveloped me. What was the point? There was nowhere to go, no escape from this damn place. I was trapped, imprisoned within my own personal purgatory. This was my punishment. Reality began to fracture, my veil of ignorance slowly lifting. Could I truly be dead? The realization dawned upon me, shattering the feeble illusion of safety and acceptance. I wasn't okay. I wasn't safe. The weight of my unease bore down upon me, threatening to consume what little resolve remained. In the face of uncertainty, I whispered the truth that echoed within my being. I'm not okay. I rolled onto my side, curling into a tight ball, clutching my legs close to my chest. I surrendered to the oceans that consumed me. I ceased all efforts, resigned to my fate. Time lost all meaning as I lay there motionless, accumulating layers of dust upon my immobile body. Months or perhaps years passed in this frozen state. I remained frozen, a monument to despair and defeat. The weight of my surrender bore down upon me, and I grew stagnant in body and spirit. As time passed, a small voice emerged from the depths of my being, offering tiny shards of defiance. It urged me to continue, questioning why I should give up. The relentless nagging of that voice eroded the staleness of my resolve, and so, with great effort, I gave in to the persistent beckoning within. I began to stir, my brittle bones creaking and cracking in response to the tentative movements. Every inch of my being protested, muscles screaming as I defied the platitudes that had held me captive. The desire for something different, something more, ignited within me. It took time, but I managed to rise to a sitting position. My body clung stubbornly to the remnants of my self-imposed stagnation, resisting my will. But I knew I had to move. Just move. I whispered those two simple words to myself, a mantra in the stillness. With each painful twitch and every tear in my flesh, I pressed forward. The blinding light pierced through the darkness, and I quickly shielded my eyes. The hallway, once shrouded in darkness, was now ablaze with the furious glow of burning candles, illuminating every inch of the endless walls adorned with their white doors. Shielding my eyes from the searing exposure, I recoiled from the scorching heat that began to radiate from the flames. I peered through the gaps in my fingers, and a sight greeted me that filled my heart with renewed hope. There, at the end of the hallway, lay an exit, a definite continuation beyond these confines. A rush of motivation coursed through my veins, igniting a fire within my soul. Leaning against the wall for support, I willed my legs to carry me forward, pushing past the pain with each step. The longing to reach that final door consumed me, drowning out the agony. I moved with a shaky shuffle that evolved into a stiff, determined speed walk. In retrospect, I can only imagine the nightmarish image I presented. But at that moment, all I wanted was to reach the end, to embrace the promise it held. With each passing door, I caught glimpses of their numbered plaques. 37, 39, 41, 43. The numbers ascended. I found myself running soon enough. The blinding light soon seared through my closed eyelids, a new symphony of pain. Perhaps I should have gauged the distance to the end, but in my blind pursuit, I collided with the ending wall with a resounding thud. The impact broke my nose, and I tumbled to the floor, disoriented and wounded. As my body sprawled upon the ground, the once illuminated candles in the hallway extinguished one by one, enveloping the space behind me in impenetrable darkness. Yet, amidst the obscurity, one candle remained defiantly aflame. The candle beside the door labeled number 158. Its flickering glow drew my gaze, anchoring me to the present. Candle, candle. The word reverberated within the recesses of my mind, its significance echoing relentlessly. And then, like a distant echo from the past, a strained and familiar voice permeated my thoughts. Kill candle, it urged, a haunting reminder of the encounters I had faced. The voice, bearing the same ragged quality that had sent chills down my spine before, emerged from the darkness, piercing the silence with its command. A low, ominous rumble stirred in the distance, a sound foreign and unsettling to my ears. It started as a mere murmur, barely perceptible, but gradually swelled in volume, intensifying with each passing moment. The air itself seemed to thicken and vibrate with distraught energy, a growing force that quelled the surroundings. I felt it from deep inside my being. It was the sound of impending doom, a creeping darkness that threatened to swallow everything in its path. As the rumble resonated through the depths of my being, a profound distress began growing within me. It crawled beneath my skin, coiling around my muscles and sinew with a chilling grip. The sensation of impending nothingness clawed at my very core, filling me with a deep-seated dread. It was a fear unlike any I had ever experienced, a realization that I stood at the precipice of an inevitable and irrevocable end. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily with a visceral stab of anxiety that sent tremors through me. The world around me seemed to hold its breath, as if bracing for the impending collision with an unimaginable force. I stood helplessly transfixed, caught between fight and flight. A deer in headlights. The rumble grew louder, reverberating with a resonance that shook very fabric of reality, and it quivered under its weight. With trembling hands, I clutched at the doorknob. My small rattles quickly became me desperately trying to twist it open, but the doorknob remained stubbornly locked. The rumble grew louder as the unstoppable force closed in on me. Panic surged within me, causing me to frantically shake the door with wild desperation, but still, it resisted, unyielding to my futile attempts. That feeling grew ever stronger, and I became ever more frantic. I felt as though I fell into the quicksand of insanity. Kill. Candle. The words thundered in my mind, echoing over the impending roar that threatened to consume me. It was a command, a directive to extinguish the flame. In a moment of clarity, amidst the chaos, I realized what I had to do. I reached out, smothering the candle's flame with my bare hand, and at last, the door swung open. I was violently thrust forward, pulled into the void. The deafening roar receded, replaced by a disorienting rush of motion as I spun and flailed, completely at the mercy of another unseen force. Control slipped from my grasp once more, leaving me to surrender to the unknown as I flipped and spun through the void once again. Abruptly, the tumult ceased, and I found myself standing outside my own house, a surreal tableau, frozen in time. There, I witnessed an enigmatic moment, a version of myself suspended mid-swing, the axe poised to strike the creature's neck. It was a fractured moment of the reality I had left behind all that time ago, a moment frozen in space and time. Taking a hesitant step forward, I was abruptly hurled back into my own body, the fragments of my existence reuniting. Time resumed its course, and I felt the weight of the axe as it carried out its intended purpose. The blade connected with a solid, metallic impact, tearing a new rift in the fabric of reality. I was again plunged into a jarring darkness. The whirlwind of confusion was the only thing familiar anymore. The musty scent of familiarity, reminiscent of my high school days, filled the air, punctuating the otherwise suffocating silence. In an instant, my vision returned, but this time with a disorienting rush accompanied by dizzying vertigo. I found myself standing in the classroom where my mother used to teach, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. Confusion clouded my thoughts as I turned my gaze to the left, and there she was, my mother staring at me in disbelief. A collective gasp rose from the students, their eyes fixed upon me with fear and horror. The weight of their stares pressed upon me, making me acutely aware of the unusual circumstances I found myself in. I glanced at my feet in habitual embarrassment, and there I noticed the axe embedded in the gas line, emitting an ominous hiss that sliced through the thick silence. My eyes darted back to my mother, and on her desk, illuminated by a solitary burning candle, my gaze fixated. The word echoed relentlessly in my mind, its significance growing with each repetition. Candle, the candle, the candle. In a reflexive surge of urgency, I released my grip on the axe, discarding any semblance of thought, and propelled myself toward the desk. But my efforts were in vain, for as my fingers reached out, a catastrophic chain of events unfurled before me. In an instant, the classroom erupted in a fierce eruption, an inferno that devoured everything in its path. The sheer force of the explosion shook the very foundation of reality, hurling me against a wall, my body crumpling behind a nearby desk. Charred and broken, my form bore the scars of the blast, yet my consciousness stubbornly clung on. I felt pain unparalleled to any other I'd experienced so far. Amid the chaos, I gathered myself and began to crawl toward my mother's mangled figure. She lay there, torn asunder, yet desperately still clinging to life. With every ounce of strength left in me, I painstakingly dragged my injured body toward her, my movements a testament to sheer determination. My hand reached out, seeking connection, but instead encountered a severed limb. Undeterred, I reached my mother, and she extended her remaining arm, seizing my hand with a desperate grasp, our bond unbroken even in the face of such devastation. "Mom," I sobbed, my voice choked with anguish. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt over her broken form. "Mom, I'm sorry," I cried out, my words punctuated by deep sobs. "I am so sorry, Mom." Her eyes met mine, and in that delicate moment, she mustered all she had to utter a sweet whisper. "I love you," she barely managed, a weak attempt at a smile gracing her lips. But as her grip weakened, her hand slipped away, surrendering to the pull of gravity. I collapsed once more, pressing my head against her scorching shoulder, the flames from her burning clothes licking at my tear-soaked eyes. At that moment, the white-hot pain of loss eclipsed any physical pain I might have felt. The realization struck with cruel clarity. I hadn't succeeded in extinguishing the candle. I had failed once again, repeating the cycle for the 158th time. The weight of my failure bore down on me, crushing my soul into a cloud of fine dust to be carried away with the hellfire that consumed my surroundings. I didn't deserve the reprieve of holding my mother. I needed to escape from the desolation I had wrought. Crawling on hands stained with her blood, I retreated to the corner of the room. My arms hung limply at my sides, my body trembling with a mixture of guilt and revulsion. I didn't want to touch anything, especially not myself. I recoiled from my own skin, my hands, the instruments of her demise. I wanted to shed my skin as it pressed its decrepit form ever closer to my heart. "I killed my mom," I whispered, the words heavy with self-condemnation. I trembled uncontrollably, consumed by my otherworldly screams of anguish and sorrow that shattered the air. Suddenly, a voice pierced the chaos from behind me. "Hey," it yelled urgently. "We have to get out. There's a gas leak." A hand reached out and grabbed mine. As I turned to face the source, a jolt of recognition coursed through me. I was staring at myself, another version of me, yet somehow different, younger. At that moment, I realized with terror that I had become the embodiment of the nightmare. "Shouts!" I screamed a primal cry of disgust and horror, forcing the other me to retreat in a frightened flurry. Days have passed since then. After the younger me fled, I was pulled back to our timeline. This timeline, for the final time. I hope my journey was enlightening, entertaining. I hope you won't stagnate as I did. And if you ever find yourself stagnant, placated, absent, and it's the why that keeps you down, then you should also ask yourself, why not? Your reasons just might be enough to move forward again. The Forgotten. I was a kid in the 1960s when the United American Empire rose from the ashes of democracy. I remember the neon-drenched streets, the towering arcologies that pierced the smog-choked sky, and the incessant drone of propaganda that seeped into every crevice of our lives. It was an age of technological wonders and dark secrets, where the government's iron grip tightened around society's throat, squeezing out every last gasp of dissent. In those days, urban legends spread like viruses through the underbelly of our crumbling civilization. But one story chilled me to the core, the tale of the Forgotten. They weren't just people who had been silenced or killed. They were erased, wiped from existence as if they had never drawn breath. Most dismissed it as paranoia, a fever dream born from the toxic mix of fear and oppression that permeated our lives. But I couldn't let it go. As a journalist, I'd seen the cracks in the empire's facade, glimpsed the rotting core beneath the gleaming surface. The story of the Forgotten gnawed at me, a splinter in my mind that I couldn't extract. My investigation led me to a small town in the Midwest, a place that time and progress seemed to have overlooked. On the surface, it was picturesque, all white picket fences and manicured lawns, but something was off. A wrongness that set my teeth on edge. The smiles of the residents were too wide, their eyes too vacant. It was as if someone had painted a Norman Rockwell scene over a Hieronymus Bosch hellscape. I started interviewing the townspeople, and that's when the true horror revealed itself. They spoke in rehearsed phrases, their words eerily similar, as if reading from an invisible script. When I pressed for details about their pasts, their eyes would glaze over, and they'd struggle to recall basic facts about their lives. It was as if their memories were fragmented, pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that no longer fit together. As I dug deeper, the town's facade began to crack. People started avoiding me, crossing the street when they saw me coming. The local authorities, with their perfectly pressed uniforms and dead eyes, warned me to leave, but I couldn't. I was too close to the truth. One night, the power cut out as I pored over my notes in my dingy motel room. The darkness that engulfed me was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the sound itself. My breath caught in my throat as I felt an overwhelming presence surrounding me. My phone was dead. The door wouldn't budge, and panic clawed at my insides. That's when I heard them, whispers in the darkness, a cacophony of voices repeating my name in a soulless chant. Shadows moved around me, their forms barely visible in the gloom. I felt cold hands grasp at me, pulling me into the abyss. When I came to, I was standing in the town square, surrounded by a sea of blank faces. Their eyes were hollow, reflecting nothing but emptiness. One of them spoke, their voice a monotone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't have come here," they said. "You've seen too much." I tried to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I was being erased from the inside out, my very essence unraveling like a frayed thread. Memories slipped away like sand through an hourglass. My childhood, my family, my name. I fought to hold on to something, anything, but the darkness was overwhelming. As my identity crumbled, I saw the truth. These people, these empty shells, were the forgotten. They had been erased and reshaped into perfect citizens, their individuality stripped away to serve the Empire's dystopian vision. I awoke in a different town, my mind a shattered mirror reflecting fragments of who I used to be. The people here were friendly, their smiles achingly familiar, but beneath the veneer of normalcy, I could sense the wrongness, the hollow noise that pervaded everything. Days blurred together as I struggled to piece together my past. Flashes of memory would surface, a face, a name, a feeling, only to slip away again. But one thing remained constant, the presence of the forgotten. I could feel them watching me, waiting for the moment when I would remember too much. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispers again. They call to me, promising peace if I just let go, if I allow myself to be erased completely. But a part of me still clings to the truth, to the horror I uncovered. The government's secret remains safe, buried beneath layers of manipulation and enforced amnesia. But I know that one day, the forgotten will come for me again. And when they do, I fear that this time, there will be nothing left of me to resist. As I write these words, I can feel my grip on reality slipping. The edges of my vision blur, and the shadows in the corners of my room seem to move with purpose. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, how much longer I can remember. If you're reading this, beware. The Empire's reach is long, and its methods are insidious. Question everything, trust no one, and whatever you do, don't dig too deep. For in the heart of this dark empire, some truths are better left forgotten.